My father refused to acknowledge my success and told me I would never amount to anything. When I proved him wrong, he denied me the credit I deserved and told me to get out. As he spoke those words, I knew I had to take action. "You will regret this," I said. What he didn't know was that his entire reputation was about to be crushed in front of the world. I grew up in Lexington, Kentucky. My dad, Charles, was one of those men people respected in public but feared in private. He was a high school principal for over 25 years. Everyone in the district knew him as Mr. H, this stern, old-school disciplinarian who ran his school like a boot camp. Teachers were scared of him, students hated him, and parents admired him because he looked like order, like control, like the kind of man who keeps boys in line. I was his only child, just me and him after Mom died when I was 8. And from the moment she passed, it was like I became a project he didn't want but couldn't return. I wasn't allowed to cry at her funeral. He actually grabbed my arm during the service and whispered, "You stop that. Be a man." I was 8. That moment set the tone for the next 20 years of my life. He didn't teach me how to drive. He didn't show up to my science fairs or my baseball games. He'd say, "I'm not here to coddle you. Life's hard. Get used to it." If I failed a test, I'd get grounded for a month. If I got an A, he'd ask what extra credit I missed. When I told him I wanted to work with computers, he said, "You think sitting in front of a screen is a job? You think that's real work?" He had no idea what the world had become, no clue how the internet worked beyond checking his email and watching Fox News. I got a full scholarship to the University of Louisville, and when I told him, he said, "We'll see how long that lasts." He never came to visit me once while I was in college. I graduated top of my class. I started working on a little tool that helps small companies handle compliance stuff like background checks, W-4 forms, digital onboarding. I used my refund checks and some side coding jobs to build the first version. It started small. A few law offices, a couple of HVAC companies. But word spread. I brought on a co-founder, then a developer, then a virtual assistant. By the time I was 28, I was making 6 figures. At 30, we hit our first million in revenue. And not once did I hear, "I'm proud of you," from my dad. When I bought a house in Nashville, I invited him to see it. He walked through the place, arms crossed, looked at the hardwood floors, the backyard, the home office, and said, "Must be nice to spend someone else's money." That's when I knew nothing I ever did would be enough. Still, I tried. Every Thanksgiving, I drive up with my wife. Every Christmas, we'd bring our daughter. He never asked questions, never held her, never said her name out loud. He called my wife her or the wife. Once he told my daughter to stop whining like a girl when she cried after bumping her head. She was 3. Eventually, I stopped going. 3 months ago, I was invited to give a keynote at a regional education tech conference in Lexington. I was hesitant at first. I didn't really want to go back. But then I thought about all the teachers, the kids, the parents in that town who had been dismissed or bullied by men like my dad. Maybe they deserved to hear from someone who had escaped it. I talked about failure. I talked about fear. I talked about being told you'll never make it and using that to push forward. People clapped. A few people came up to me afterward and said things like, "I had a principal like that growing up. You reminded me I wasn't crazy." An older man who'd known my dad from back in the day asked if he was proud. I said, "I wouldn't know." 2 days later, I got the call. He was furious, screaming, told me I made him look bad, told me I was dragging the family name through the mud. I told him I didn't mention his name once. That made it worse. "You ungrateful little shit," he said. "You're nothing without me. You're weak because of your mother. All your success is just dumb luck." I said, "I built something you never could. You broke people down. I lifted people up." He said, "You think that makes you better than me? Get the hell out of my life. Don't come back." And that was it. The last straw. The years of silence. The holidays full of tension. The constant belittling. The pride he couldn't give, even when I earned it 100 times over. I said, "You'll regret this."
And I meant it.
What he didn't know, what no one knew, was that 6 months earlier, I had acquired a small firm that did back-end data analysis for school districts. Part of their job was scanning grant allocation patterns, vendor contracts, and district-wide communications. They had archives going back 10 years. Some of those archives came from the district where my dad had worked until he retired. I started digging. What I found wasn't just petty. It was criminal. And I had the keys to everything. It started with one email, dated back to 2017. A vendor contract between the school district and a local tech supplier, someone I'd never heard of. But the email was CC'd to my dad's district address, even though he had officially retired the year before. I dug deeper. Turns out, the supplier was run by a guy named Brad Whitlow. Brad was my dad's former student, a C-average jock who barely graduated. He failed algebra twice, but my dad passed him through because football season needed him. I remembered him.
Loud. Dumb.
The kind of guy who always got a second chance, as long as he kissed up to the right people. In 2016, Brad's new company started getting school contracts for IT consulting, classroom tablets, networking upgrades. Except Brad's company had no reviews, no real staff, no website. Just a P.O. box and some invoices. I pulled records from 3 other districts in the region. Brad's company got paid over $2.3 million in education tech services across 5 years. I followed the trail. The same contracts, same language, same inflated prices. All of them had approval notes from the same email aliases, middle managers my dad had personally hired before he left. In one case, I found a scanned PDF of a handwritten note from my dad himself. Push this through ASAP. Good people. Then I found the payments. Brad had made 5 wire transfers to an account in my dad's name. I traced them through a dummy holding company that listed my dad as the logistics consultant. The total was nearly $400,000 over 4 years. And it wasn't just financial. There were emails from whistleblowers, teachers who complained about missing tablets, faulty software, delayed installations. Some were ignored. Some were reprimanded. One was forced into early retirement. My dad's old assistant principal wrote in one message, "Don't poke the bear. Charles has friends at the board." It hit me hard. Not just because it proved he was corrupt, but because it made sense. My whole life, he'd acted like a man obsessed with control. Not ethics. Not leadership. Control. He didn't care about rules. He cared about who made them. And now I had proof. Still, I didn't act right away. I wanted to make sure everything was locked in. I had lawyers help me verify the documents, the shell companies, the money trail. I compiled a dossier, every email, every payment, every contract. Neatly organized. Unshakable. Then I waited for the right moment. It came in the form of a community event in Lexington, the school board's annual Education Legacy Gala. Every year, they honored someone from the district for their lifetime contribution. And this year's honoree? Charles H., my father. I bought a ticket under a friend's name. He didn't recognize me at first. I wore a dark suit, sat in the back, kept quiet. But I watched him schmooze and smile, bask in the spotlight he always wanted. I listened as they read off his achievements, including how he mentored dozens of rising professionals, like Brad. When he got on stage to speak, I felt cold. He looked out at the crowd and said, "I may not have always been soft, but I believed in discipline. I believed in building young men who could carry this country forward." My hands were shaking. Later that night, I uploaded the full dossier to a secure Dropbox folder and sent it anonymously to 3 local news stations, 2 education watchdog groups, and the Kentucky Department of Education. But I didn't stop there. I also sent it to the gala organizers. And Brad's biggest client. The next day, the story broke. The fallout started faster than I expected. By noon the day after the gala, local news outlets were running headlines: "Corruption in Lexington School District. Former principal implicated in vendor fraud scheme." They didn't name my dad directly at first, just a retired administrator with ties to multiple contracts. But anyone who'd grown up in the district knew who they meant. I stayed quiet. I didn't post anything online. I didn't talk to anyone. I just watched. By the second day, the story had gone statewide. My dad denied everything. I know because he went live on a local radio show. I sat in my kitchen, listening to him lie through his teeth. Those documents are fake. I've never accepted $1 from anyone. This is a smear campaign by someone with a grudge. He sounded calm, controlled, the same way he used to sound when he stood outside my bedroom door, telling me I'd never be anything without him. But here's the thing, I knew how much he cared about appearances. The press was bad enough. But it got worse when the school board, his old kingdom, issued a statement saying they were opening a formal investigation. That's when the real cracks started to show. 2 of his former colleagues turned on him. One of them, Mr. Green, a retired vice principal, went on record and said, "We all knew something was wrong." Charles protected his favorites. Those vendor contracts came out of nowhere. The other was someone I hadn't thought about in years. Ms. Lewis, the assistant principal he once screamed at in front of the whole staff for challenging his policies. She gave an interview where she said, "He manipulated everyone around him. And when you stood up to him, he buried you." That hit hard. But it still wasn't enough for me. Then something happened I didn't expect. I got a call from Brad. He must have found out I was behind the leak. Maybe someone tipped him off. He left a voicemail. "I don't know what you think you're doing, but this won't end the way you want. You think you're better than us? You're not. We built something. And you're tearing it down for what? Daddy issues." That last part sent me over the edge. I did more digging into Brad. Turns out, he had pending contracts with 2 counties, pending because of my dad's referrals. If those deals fell through, he'd lose almost $600,000 in projected revenue. I made sure they did. I contacted the school boards myself, under my company's name. I told them what our audit teams had found. I made it sound routine. Just good faith compliance work. I never mentioned Brad by name, but I gave them just enough to pause. One of those boards canceled the contract outright. The other one launched its own internal review. Brad went silent after that. But the biggest twist came a week later. I was sitting in my office when I got an email from my dad. The subject line just said, "We need to talk." The body of the email was short. "You win. Hope it was worth it." That was the first time he'd ever admitted defeat, even if it was just 2 bitter lines. But then the real bomb dropped. I got a message from a reporter at one of the local stations. She said she'd received something strange in her tip line, a set of documents naming me, my company, and implying I had falsified the evidence. They came from an anonymous source, but I knew who it was. My dad was trying to flip the script. He was accusing me of manufacturing the entire story out of revenge. He was framing me. When I read that reporter's message, I froze. My father had always been manipulative, but this was different. He wasn't just denying the truth now, he was trying to erase it. Smear me. Make me look like the bitter son with a grudge, willing to forge documents just to get revenge. But I had one thing he didn't. Proof. I didn't build my company by accident. I documented everything. The data I used in the dossier had timestamps, source origins, metadata. Every email, every payment receipt, every contract, I had the server logs to back them up. What I sent out wasn't just screenshots. It was the kind of evidence that would hold up in court. Still, I knew the public wouldn't care about that. People love a scandal, and they love even more when the accuser becomes the accused. I couldn't risk my name getting dragged through the mud. So I made one final move. I booked an interview with the same news station that broke the story. I didn't go as the tech CEO. I went as his son. I told them everything on record. What it was like growing up under him. How I was always told I'd fail. How he refused to acknowledge anything I'd done. And how, after years of silence and insults, I found out he wasn't the disciplined hero people thought he was. He was just another man hiding behind his image, using his position for power and money. Then I showed them the evidence. All of it. My attorneys even gave them verified timestamps, audit trails, and internal memos linking my dad and Brad to the contracts. I explained how I got it, how it was legally accessed after the merger, and how I had spent months validating it before going public. The piece aired 3 days later, and this time they named him
Charlache.
former Lexington principal, accused of long-running vendor fraud scheme, exposed by his own son. It exploded. People started coming forward. Teachers, janitors, even a few old students. One man said he'd been suspended in high school for something he didn't do, just because he'd talked back in class. Another said my dad blocked his mother's promotion because she refused to kiss up to him. Brad disappeared. His company's website went offline. His social media accounts vanished. Rumors swirled that he fled to Florida. But the final blow came when the Kentucky Board of Education released their findings. Multiple violations, including misuse of funds, unethical hiring practices, and direct financial conflict of interest involving Charles H. They stripped him of all honorary titles. The school board removed his name from the Legacy Hall. His pension was frozen, pending legal review. He was done. I thought I'd feel relief. I didn't. I felt tired. Not regret. Just emptiness. A few weeks later, I got one last message from him. A letter. Handwritten. No apology. Just bitterness. You ruined everything. For what? So you could be right. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Because in the end, it wasn't about being right. It was about being free. Free from a man who tried to control everything around him. Free from the lie that I had to earn his approval to matter. I didn't. My daughter asked about him once. I just told her. He was someone I used to know. That's the truth. And now, the whole world knows who he really was. That's my revenge. And it's the kind that sticks.